Welcome to the King of the Court podcast with Ben Riggs and Ben Staten.
All right, welcome to the King of the Court podcast. I'm Ben Riggs. This is Ben Staten.
Hey, real quick, what do you think of that Mavs win last night?
The Mavs, without Luka and Kyrie, they're going to struggle to compete night in and night out. There are some games that they should win coming up. We'll talk about that in a minute. There are going to be some games that are going to be difficult to win. But they showed you last night, and quite frankly, they've shown you in a few games prior to this, why they're a team no one wants to draw in the postseason. You know what you've got with Luka and Kyrie. Luka's an offensive weapon, really with no equal at his position in the league. Kyrie is arguably the best second option scorer in the NBA. Elite ball handler, can shoot from anywhere on the court and score from anywhere on the court. But what you're really seeing right now is the expansion of PJ Washington's game, him becoming a consistent offensive presence that can, knock down some open threes, but also attack closeout, score at the rim, punish smaller defenders with post play. You're seeing Quinton Grimes as an elite scorer off the bench. He's been able to make some of these games close down the stretch, and last night, him and PJ Washington were able to really drive a nail into the coffin for the Lakers. And then you also got guys like Klay Thompson, who's arguably the best spot-up shooter in NBA history, who's shooting the ball well. There was a run that he had last night that really put the Mavericks out ahead, and they never looked back. And then you had in the fourth quarter, Jaden Hardy step up and knock down some big shots, extend their lead, and really seal the deal. And not only do I think that this depth makes the Mavericks a team that nobody wants to see in the postseason, despite all of the injuries that the Mavs have experienced right now, despite Luka and Kyrie being out, despite the stretch that they have coming up, I argue that the most likely seed for the Mavericks at the end of the season, given how good they are when they're fully healthy, is the 2 seed. I still have them as the best team in the West.
Basketball's a game of chess. And shout out to the real Daryl 282 who wrote that in the comments of our most recent video. We love people when they comment. But I really think what separates the Mavs from everyone else in the West is they are the only team that has the full complement of chess pieces. OKC has a really deep roster, but they have like 8 rooks. They don't have a rook, a bishop, and a knight. Dallas has every type of player. They got the slashers. They got the physical post players. They got the shooters. They got the rim running centers. They got the physical centers. They got the defensive minded centers. They are the most complete team in my mind in the West. And I think what we're seeing, it's been a little bit rough before this, but I think what you're seeing is even though you're missing Luka and Kyrie, you're missing, 80 points combined, points and assists. This team, when it's working, the supplemental pieces, the secondary pieces are good enough to steal a game against a team which I believe is 5th in the West, 4th in the West. They're out of the play-in. This is a good Lakers team. They're not world beaters, but this is a good Lakers team.
And I think that's a good point, because so much of the commentary ends up being shaped by the guys who have the national broadcast. And last night it was TNT, and Charles Barkley continued his very weird grudge against the Lakers. And I don't think the Lakers are contenders. Right? I think they're a good team.
Yeah.
They are a good team. Like Austin Reeves is an elite playmaker. He's paired with LeBron and AD. We both know who they are. I think that they're a good team. And what the Mavericks did last night, and shout out to Jason Kidd, who's caught a lot of shit recently on Mavs Twitter. But I don't know, exactly what you expect of a coach to be able to do when he's down not just 2 best players, but 2 of the best players in the league that your franchise is built around. But he found a way to get it done last night by looking at his pieces, sticking with the chess analogy, looking at the pieces the other team had and finding out a way to exploit them. And he continually ISO'd Austin Reeves. He got switches with Austin Reeves onto PJ so PJ could back him down and punish him. Quinton Grimes was just too much. Dinwiddie was too much. In fact, it's kind of ironic in that Dinwiddie is not in a negative sense, but he's kind of a foul merchant like Austin Reeves, in that they create contact on the drive and get the shot up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so Austin Reeves got a little bit of a taste of his own medicine last night, but I thought it was a supremely coached game by Jason Kidd. Quinton Grimes continued his excellent play. I mean, last night he had 23 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists on 47% shooting, was 6-11 from 3. And that sounds like an outstanding game, and it really is. But, I mean, here recently we've seen some outstanding play from Quinton Grimes. He had a great game against Cleveland. You know, I think it's a little bit of a good news, bad news situation for Dallas Mavericks and their fans.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. I believe they were on a 5-game losing streak or a 6-game losing streak heading into this. They won a game. They earned that victory. The final score makes that game look like more of a blowout
Less competitive than it was.
Lakers just kind of crumbled down the stretch. And I think that if you also saw Dallas break the Lakers. The Klay Thompson, the 3 3-pointers he made in a row, like that was just a backbreaker for them. But I think one of the questions you have is, I mean, we're dealing with a spree of injuries on the Dallas side, which has bordered on the laughable at this point. Like everyone's gotten injured. Everyone, or they're getting like illnesses that, like, when you read about them, like, did they get cholera? Are we sure that we tested them for cholera? Because it seems like everyone's just literally dying out there. And I think that one of the things we're going to deal with, especially given that, of course, this had to happen at a time where the schedule is going to be the toughest it's going to be at any point in the season. Like, we're not saying Dallas right now is going to go off and like be 500 over the next 12 games when they play basically all the playoff teams in the East and the West over the next little bit. I don't think anyone's saying that. And I think that given how competitive the West is, the most likely outcome is when Luka and Kyrie come back, Dallas is either going to be in the play-in or a little bit out of it, but still within shooting distance of being able to get back into it. I don't think anyone here at this point, assuming that Luka comes back in the next month or 2 months at worst, that Dallas is going to be in a situation where they can't make the play-in. But do we think that the current roster, we've just talked about how good the supporting cast is. Do we think the current roster, if Dallas is able to scratch its way back into the play-in or just outside of it, is good enough to win 3 rounds in the Western Conference in the playoffs on the road?
So
they did it last year. So like, this isn't impossible. But do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's almost like a no-brainer. I don't have any hesitation at all about saying that the Mavericks can go on the road and win 3 playoff series. But I want to backtrack even more than that. Some of the other good news for Mavs fans last night would have been the fact that Jason Kidd addressed the Kyrie Irving injury and said that he didn't think that there's any long-term implications whatsoever to the injury, and that he'll be back in, probably the lower end of the timetable that was first announced. So you're probably looking at like a couple more games for Kyrie. And then with Luka, he's not in a walking boot. He's not on that little scooter thing. He's just walking around. In fact, I think you could hear him sort of on a hot mic talking to Dorian Finney-Smith before the game, saying, "I've got to get back and go do a workout." And so, like, I actually think that.
Did Tim McMahon hear that? Are we sure that wasn't for Tim McMahon's ears? I know he was at the game.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, for ESPN. Luka is working out. I want to make that very clear.
I think that when you look at the Dallas Mavericks and the way that Jason Kidd is approaching this stretch, one noticeable piece of intel to me is that despite Quinton Grimes' excellent play recently, and it's been a fairly good little stretch for him.
He's been excellent since he had a rough shooting.
He had a rough start.
Games.
And then once he got over that, he was good to go.
The Mavs were super high on him even before he played a single game. And anyone who's followed him last year, like the New York Knicks, when he's played, I believe, 2 years there. In his third year, it was his third year in New York last year. And before that year, he had been considered a piece of the core of the Knicks. And then he had a really rough third year, lost his confidence, publicly talked about it, got shipped to Detroit as part of a deal that got him Bogdanovic. And then Dallas is part of one of the many really, really solid moves that they've done. They somehow got Tim Hardaway Jr. and some second for Quinton Grimes. They've valued him ever since. So I think he's been one of the key pieces of the rotation, since the beginning of the year. But to me, if we're him and Gafford and Marshall, that trio is the best 8-man rotation in the league. But I think you're getting to this, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, but it was interesting to me to see that per Windhorst, he's being shopped around the league pretty aggressively, apparently.
I'm not getting to that because I don't think that it's a real thing. I think that in fact, I'll one way, what I was getting to was I think that Quinton Grimes, despite his good play it's clear that he is the most dangerous person on the Mavs team with the ball in his hand out at the perimeter on a consistent night in and night out basis. Without Luka and Kyrie available. And the fact that Jason Kidd still continues to play him off the bench tells me he is eyeing a very important role for Quinton Grimes down the stretch as their sixth man coming off the bench as a microwave scorer in really critical moments to help minimize the non-Luka, non-Kyrie minutes. So you're probably going to see him in the playoffs paired with Luka and paired with Kyrie in really critical moments to give one of the others a breather. And I think that he's preparing him for that role rather than putting him in as a starter. I think he's acclimating him to that role coming off the bench. And I also think that you can surmise from that Jason Kidd is looking forward more than he is looking right in front of him. He is prepping Quinton Grimes for that moment more than he is focused on trying to win these games as though they are must wins. And so, like, with that in mind, one of the things I was going to mention is this next stretch of games, because we've been fixated on the Luka timeline. And I think that the Mavs' ability to win a long stretch of games without Luka and without Kyrie both is an entirely different question than being able to win games without just Luka.
Oh, 100%. No,
so-
like you mentioned that they won a game, but you don't win consistently missing 80 points of production. That's just not a
100%.
thing that happens in the NBA. It doesn't happen at the youth level like that. Like for heaven's sakes.
100%. So with that said, their next game is against the Trailblazers. They can absolutely win that one without Luka and Kyrie.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't.
No,
on the 28th. And
No, they didn't.
They had Kyrie on that. Like the Blazers are a competitive little feisty bunch.
They're a competitive team, but if I'm betting money, I'm betting on the Mavericks winning this game at home.
Yeah.
The next game is much tougher.
Next two games, be very clear.
Well, it's one of these. Yes, the next two games are against the same team.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think that it is possible at home for them to split that series. I wouldn't bet on it, but I think it's possible for them to split that series at home, especially if Jokic isn't back by then.
If Jokic isn't back, that changes the dynamic. If Jokic is back, that makes it really difficult. That makes it really difficult.
I don't disagree, but the next game after that is the Pelicans. They can win that. So what we're talking about is them going 500 without Kyrie or Luka by being able to beat the Timberwolves and the Pelicans.
In the best case scenario, yeah. Those are you should be competitive at the very least in the Portland and New Orleans games.
Yes, I would actually bet that the Mavericks win both of those games. And I'm not going to bet any money, but having the Nuggets twice at home, I think one of those games are going to be competitive. And if it's a night where you had shooting from 5 different guys like you did last night, I do think that the Mavericks can pull one of those off. Then you get into a stretch of games where the Mavericks have Kyrie back. I think it's possible you have Kyrie back by that Pelicans game, maybe even by the Nuggets game, which would be Tuesday, so a week from yesterday. If the initial timetable for Kyrie was a week and it's been a few days, I think you can actually have Kyrie back by the second Nuggets game, which would also change the dynamic in that game. But I actually think it's probably likely you have him back by the Pelicans game. Then you have the Thunder. That's going to be tough without Luka, but if I'm not mistaken, they beat Luka the first time. They beat him the first time without Luka.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I wouldn't place money on them in that situation.
I wouldn't bet money on them either. But like, if the team's playing well, they've already done it once this year. In the same vein that you mentioned that they lost to the Trailblazers the first time, I would say similarly they beat the Thunder earlier in the year without Luka, and this game will be at home. Then they have the Hornets. I think that they can beat the Hornets. I think that they can.
Back, yes.
I think that they can beat the Timberwolves with Kyrie back. And to be clear, if Kyrie's not back, by the time we're talking about the Thunder game, then what Jason Kidd said last night about there being no long-term implications from the injury is clearly not true, because we're a couple weeks out at that point. But I think that they can beat the Timberwolves at home. And that's sort of the saving grace for the Mavericks right now. A lot of these games are going to be at home. They have a really long home stretch because of how many away games they've played up until this point. They've got a road game against the Thunder will be tough. They've got a home game against the Celtics will be tough. Then they have Wizards, Pelicans, Pistons before they play the Cavaliers again. With Kyrie back, I do think that they can break above 500 in those games. I don't think that you can be. To be clear, I mean the whole stretch of games. I don't mean the games against specifically those last three teams I mentioned. But I think the good news, bad news thing for the Mavericks is, if you're a Mavs fan and you watched that last night, and then you just now think they're just about to go run through every team that they have ahead of them, they're not gonna. Like, I think the best case scenario is they split the series with Denver at home. Yes. I think the best case scenario is they snipe OKC at home. I don't think they're going into Oklahoma and winning that game. I don't think they're going to beat the Cavaliers. I don't think they're going to beat
that would be impressive
to beat the Celtics, right? Now, one thing I will say about the Celtics is the Celtics do have a history of showing up against some of these teams that they don't expect much from and playing down to that competition.
That's their MO.
That would be a gift to the Mavericks if they could steal a win off of something like that. But I think if they hover around the 5-6 seed, and to be clear, in terms of the standings, they could be benefited by other teams not performing up to their expectations as well and kind of keeping them in that spot. And so if they can hover around the 5-6 seed during Luka's absence, I have no doubt in my mind that the Mavericks, at full strength, with Luka and Kyrie on the court, Luka, Kyrie, Klay, PJ Washington, and Dereck Lively on the court in the starting five, with Quinton Grimes, Daniel Gafford, Naji Marshall coming off the bench. That 8-man rotation. Also think, like, he's going to have to be more consistent. He's going to have to overcome some of his shortcomings. But I think that when you've got a player like Jaden Hardy, who's capable of scoring in a pinch and creating a shot for himself the way that he can, the way he's been knocking down open shots, I think that Jaden Hardy being included in that rotation, there's clearly something with Maxi Kleber's shoulder dating back to last postseason where he injured his shoulder, I think, against the Clippers. He seems to be beyond hesitant to shoot the ball. He doesn't want to put the shot up. I still think he gives you defensive versatility. But if the Mavericks can make a trade to upgrade that spot, I think that's the one move that they can make in between now and then that would really boost my confidence in them. Going back to the rumor that you mentioned about Quinton Grimes, I guess it's more than a rumor when Horse is reporting it, but the idea of them shopping around Quinton Grimes, Quinton Grimes would have to be replaced by a legitimate star level player, in my opinion. You're giving up too much. Like, I seriously doubt you're swapping Quinton Grimes straight up for someone. You're probably packaging him with some other assets, and looking for a major upgrade. I'm just really skeptical of something like that happening.
I think the rumor has a couple of different legs. One, I do believe the Mavs, they have a history of being very active at the trade deadline under Nico. I think that there's also, dating back to the preseason, the Mavs and Grimes were unable to come to terms on an extension, even though both parties acknowledged that they were working towards it. And I think that that indicates pretty clearly that the Mavs, at least at that point, were unwilling to pay what Grimes wanted. They like whatever his salary demands were, they considered it too high. And I don't know. Obviously, I don't have any inside information about how the negotiations have gone. But if I would be surprised if Grimes has backed off of that, given the level of play he's had this year, which has been superb, and he's probably playing, in my opinion, the best he's ever played in his career. And he's shown that not only is he a good fit with this team right now, but he's a core piece you could have 5-6 years down the road and just have him grow with the team. So I imagine that teams, just as much as Dallas is shopping around, teams have seen this dynamic of they say, oh, well, it looks like Dallas may not be willing to pay for him. Dallas already has an expensive roster. I know they have really deep pocketed owners, but the tax was designed, the new tax and the new CBA was designed to be prohibitive even for rich people. Rich people, super wealthy is the best way to describe the current owners. But so I think that there's probably, half of the rumors are probably coming from other teams sniffing around Grimes.
I agree.
The Dallas trying to shop Grimes himself. I think that every team in the league seems to be connected to Cam Johnson. I think that that is like if you're going to trade Grimes, you're going to want a player of that caliber, that caliber back. I think that would be what you would get. Like they're not trading Grimes for 4 second round.
But I don't know why the Nets would want Grimes.
He's like 23. He'd be a good long term guard piece.
Yeah, but I don't think that they're looking for someone who's going to come in there and start busting ass and winning games.
Well, they've shown a weird desire to get those type of players. Like they just randomly traded for D'Lo, who's raised their floor too. I think that there's...
But D'Lo cancels out that at the other end. D'Lo comes in and gives you 18, 20 points, and then goes down to the other end of the floor and gives up 18, 20 points. Like, I think with Quinton Grimes, you're getting like a solid two-way player. I would just be really skeptical if the Brooklyn Nets are wanting to bring in such a positive value player as Quinton Grimes. And especially, pairing him off of someone like D'Lo who could actually help create for Quinton Grimes. I agree with what you're saying about Cam Johnson being the level of player you want to get back in exchange for that. I just think that Brooklyn's probably more interested in the draft assets.
Potentially. I also think that teams that they want to tank are very capable of finding excuses. OKC shut down Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for like three second halves of the season in a row, just to maximize their draft position in a bunch of drafts, and that's how they got Chet Holmgren. Shai would magically be injured or for the second half of each season. There are ways around that, but my question with Dallas is, and this is I think that sort of bedevils teams that are sort of very good at all, like across 1 through 8 or 1 through 9. Like they have solid players that you said. There's not a clear glaring need. Once you in a weird way, having
other than the Maxi Kleba backup power forward spot.
Yeah, having a glaring need makes it a lot easier to trade for someone than otherwise. If your team is just really good, your teams are naturally more risk averse because they don't want to make a trade that because there's unknowns, there's risk in any trade. Maybe that player could come in. Dallas knows this with Rajon Rondo a couple years ago. You can bring a really good player, and he just he doesn't get along, and it just doesn't work out. The Suns continuously acquire stars, and then they don't work out, and then their MO is apparently just to go out and try to get more of them. But so I think that they'd be very judicious about who they want, and especially with someone like Grimes, who's I know I mentioned that he probably wants a big contract. He's unless he's I would be shocked, for example, if he's like coming out like, okay, give me $30 million a year. He's going to be somewhere in the 15 to 20 million, I imagine, maybe 10 to 15, somewhere in the 10 to 20 million range. And that's very affordable for a player that, in my opinion, has high upside as a secondary piece. So, I think that even if he costs a little more, this isn't a situation like a Bradley Beal in Washington where it's like, should we pay this dude who's made one All-Star game $250 million? The price tag isn't going to be so prohibitive that I think they'd walk away from it.
Oh, I mean, I also think the idea of trading him to Brooklyn, one of the question marks then becomes does he want to sign a contract with Brooklyn?
Yeah, I mean that would be part of any negotiation.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I wouldn't. I don't understand. I think his options at the end of the season are going to be much more favorable than Brooklyn. But my thing with Dallas at this point is I think there's one major spot where they could potentially upgrade, and that's the backup power forward spot. Maxi Kleber seems to be a non-factor on offense. Seems to be incredibly hesitant to shoot the ball from the perimeter. And I think that if you could find someone to come off the bench and kind of plug the hole that he used to plug. In fact, when I say used to, I mean as early as last postseason. He gave them incredible defensive versatility coming off the bench that enabled them to really match up with virtually anybody that they would face. And then, and even then, that hole right now, once you get into the playoffs, those spot minutes, those are much shorter windows. I don't know what Omax Prosper looks like getting into the postseason. I don't think he would be as good defensively as Maxi Kleber. I think Maxi Kleber is just a more technically sound defender. But I think that Omax Prosper could improve dramatically in between now and then, and he is certainly a more effective offensive player than Maxi Kleber at this point in his career. And so you could end up seeing a situation where if Dallas is unable to fill that hole in the before the trade deadline, that Omax Prosper helps fill that hole in the postseason. I honestly, I really don't know what that's going to look like in the postseason. But outside of that, I look at Dallas's lineup, and you see Luka. You know what you're going to get from him. He is a player that's not virtually is impossible to guard one-on-one. Defenses have to scheme and shift against him. And his ability to pick them apart in the way that he does, I think, is matched by no one. And then Kyrie paired with that has taken what, Kyrie is already an incredible offensive weapon, but just much like he was next to LeBron, I think Kyrie next to Luka, they demonstrated in the postseason that they're a 1-2 punch in the front court that's the backcourt that's really, really, really difficult to deal with. The thing that I'm focused on more, because like I said, we all know what we have in Kyrie and Luka. PJ Washington has clearly expanded his game. He has become a much more consistent offensive player. He's a good perimeter defender that has, once again, a lot of versatility. He can play, back to the basket from the post position as a defender. He can also get out to the perimeter and move his feet. Naji Marshall gives you solid perimeter defense, as does Quinton Grimes. I think that perimeter defense is something that's drastically improved for the Mavericks versus last postseason. I think that perimeter shooting is something that's drastically improved for the Mavericks since last postseason with the additions of Klay Thompson, Quinton Grimes, and Naji Marshall. And I also think that PJ Washington is getting a little more consistent with his perimeter shooting. I think part of that is his ability to attack closeouts limits defenders a bit in that they don't want to close him out as aggressively. They're more worried about the closeout than they are the perimeter shot from PJ Washington. And so he's able to blow by you if you come out a little recklessly.
Yeah, I think that PJ's been fantastic this year. And I think that one of the things that's under discussed with their recent, they really struggled, especially when Kyrie went out. I think they were on a 5-game or 4-game losing streak before they beat the Lakers. And that coincided with the time that both PJ was out for a little bit and then Naji Marshall was out. So not only did they have, missing their 2 stars, they were missing 2 key role players that were central pieces. I think that we need, if the Mavs are going to have a chance, I know it was really cool that, the fight and, he connected on a pretty good right hook. They got to avoid that stuff.
The timing of that was the most inauspicious thing you could have imagined.
Yeah, it was catastrophic for the team, just to be quite honest. And I think that they also need to win these games. They're going to need these players who are role players to play consistently above the level they play typically at for a 5 to 10 game stretch, which is quite possible. Players do typically play higher than their level when they get a bigger role. These are not. We're not talking about players that are really, really limited. They have the ability to do a bunch of different things. They just they're just sort of fit into smaller slots on a good team. So I think that they have the potential to do that. I would, I think there's also, it's important to talk about, there's a chance that the Mavs end up, winning a third of these games. Let's say, especially if there's, another injury that randomly happens, if Lively goes out, then guys, I like Dwight Powell. It seems like a nice guy.
Well, you already have another injury we actually haven't mentioned, which is Gafford is out.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you're ended up having to play Omax Prosper at center because everyone else is hurt, there's or Marquise.
Or even I think you're probably at a center rotation of Maxi Kleba and Dwight Powell.
Yeah. then all bets are off. So there is there's no reason to have no hope, but it's important to be realistic. It's not the end of the world if in the next 10 games they win 3 of them. That does not reflect on the team. This doesn't mean this team is doomed. It just means if Kyrie's injury lasts a little longer than it needs to be, or they have to ramp him back up. He takes a little bit of time to get back up to speed. Everyone's hurt. This is what happens when people are hurt.
100%.
You have to be patient with teams like this. You can have hope, but it's important to be this isn't an all is lost thing. If they go off on another 5-game losing streak, it just happens. So, the important thing, honestly, at this point for this team is to get healthy with enough of a ramp to be able to dig out of a hole if they have to. That is the.
I agree with you completely about that. I think when you start looking at and to kind of put that into context, when I look at those games that they have coming up, to me, games like Portland, New Orleans, those are must wins.
Yes.
All right. Games and it's one thing because this is the nature of playing with role players. You go out against Portland and none of your guys are knocking down shots. They're not first option scorers in the NBA for a reason. And part of that reason is consistency.
Yes.
And so if you go out and Dinwiddie's not knocking down shots, it's going to be hard to win that game. Right. So even if you lose to Portland, I'm not saying it's end of the world. I'm saying if you want to stay hovering around the 5-6 seed during this stretch, what you're not looking at the return of Luka date is the date you need to, weather the storm until. You're looking at the return of Kyrie as the date.
Yes.
Because then your odds of winning these games drastically improves once he's on the floor. All right. They improve a lot more when Luka's on the floor. But when Kyrie's on the floor is when you're going to the biggest degree of improvement is going to be the return of Kyrie. Because that's the first time you're going to see an elite scorer, an elite shooter, an elite playmaker return to action. All right. Yeah. And so that's the date you're trying to weather the storm until. If you can pull off the Portland win, then effectively worst case scenario would be you lose the next 2 games to Denver. And then you get Kyrie back for the New Orleans game.
Yeah.
And then you can go into, I believe it would be Oklahoma City, having split 2 of 4 And then you go into the Oklahoma City game with Kyrie back. All right. And I think the issue becomes getting through some of these really, really, really difficult games against teams like Boston and Cleveland without Luka. And the point that I would make to Mavs fans is you're probably not going to do it. If you pull off a win against Boston without Luka, it's because Boston went into that game playing down to their competition. Yeah. Boston is absolutely a better team than Dallas when Luka's not on the floor. It's undebatable. You know, like we can have some debate with Luka on the floor, but without Luka, there's no debate.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, they...
Now, if you're a Dallas fan, you are not crazy for thinking that Boston will go into that game and play down to the competition.
Oh, no, 100%. But, like, that's a hope. You can't, like, if you're going
I agree.
Like, I guarantee they're going to do this. Like,
No, I agree with you.
And for the higher quality games, the OKC games, the Boston games, the Cavaliers, what you want to see, like, what you can hope for, the better way to look at that than whether we should go win these games or, like, be upset because they lost all four of those, is to say, like, did we play well in a lot of these? Did we play competitively? Because if you do that, that's something you can hang your hat on. Because if you're going and expecting a win, like, just be happy if you win one of them. But the reality is, OKC doesn't lose very often. Boston, 100%. Boston doesn't lose very often.
Same with Cleveland.
Cleveland doesn't lose very often. And not only that, like, OKC and Cleveland have been pummeling the shit out of teams. And they're playing really hard every night. So, like, the likelihood they come into that game and be like, we got this, is lower because they really want to win in the regular season right now. Like, they're really prioritizing that. And, if you're competitive, if you're able to do kind of what the Nuggets did to the Celtics last night, where they played them tough until the Celtics in the fourth quarter, like, okay, enough of this shit. And they sort of turned it on late. Like, that is a really good sign. That is a really good sign. And I think that what the final point I'll make, and this is more related to Jason Kidd and his coaching. Kidd, as you mentioned, has a tendency to, how did you put it? Think about the future instead of the present.
Yes.
That. Yeah.
Yes.
He's had a lot of good success with that strategy. It creates weird dynamics where the Mavs tend to go into postseason with a worse record than they should, and then they probably should be a third seed in some cases and go in as a sixth seed because he's just sort of fucking around during games and trying stuff instead of trying to win in the now. But in these games, look, if you are very comfortable losing a bunch of them, do your mad scientist little routine and try a bunch of stuff. If you really want to win these games, you got to play a playoff style rotation. You got no experimentation. No, like, well, let's see what Jason Gortman or whatever his name is can go out and do that. Like, he has to really run this like he does his lineups in the playoffs. And I think, like, on the flip side, if you see Kidd doing weird, wild stuff, that also should be, provide a measure of comfort to Mavs fans, because that means that he's not worried about losing a bunch of games during this stretch.
Yeah, sure. And I think that that's something that Mavs fans need to wrap their mind around, is that there are a lot of people on Twitter who clearly wake up in the morning and think it's Mavs game day and we need to go win this game. And it's obvious that Jason Kidd woke up that morning and thought to himself, we got a game today. It's a great opportunity to prepare Quinton Grimes to play a really pivotal role for us in a playoff series as a bench scorer. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. Now, I think what you see with Kidd is because a lot of the times what's happened in these games, so they won the Suns game of late. Everyone who plays the Suns do. They lost the Trailblazers game. That was a really competitive game that went down to the wire. Kings game was really competitive down to the the last couple minutes or so. Same with the Rockets, and then same with the Grizzlies. One of the things that happens when you get into these games is that when you get down the stretch and you need big shots, you need shot makers to step up. One of the things that you're going to find when you're playing against elite, or not even elite teams, but just fully healthy NBA teams, is that they have better shot makers down the stretch that they can more reliably turn to than a team who's missing their two best players. Right? That's just going to be a fact in NBA games. One of the things with the Lakers is once you get down the stretch, like what the Lakers want to do is be able to keep the game within 1, 2, 3 points so that drives to the basket can use drives to the basket to close you out. If you get the Lakers down to the final 2 minutes and the margin of the margin is significant enough that the Lakers have to rely on 3-point shooting, then all the Lakers can really hope for in that moment is LeBron James to be able to find a good open shooter, whether it's Austin Reeves or Dorian Finney-Smith. Sometimes you can rely on Austin Reeves with some of his deeper off the dribble threes, but for the most part, you're hoping for a LeBron heater if you're a Lakers fan in that moment. Outside of that, they don't really have just a gaggle of perimeter shooters that are just going to close that game out for them. They want a tight margin where they can get to the basket and win it there. The Mavs
they want to win at the free throw line. That's the Lakers. Like they really like when they can get LeBron in these situations and he just sort of runs headfirst into the lane, and then you know he typically gets fouled. He'll make a big type of motion and go to the ref, and then they try to basically slow the game to a pulse, or they'll go to AD and try something similar. That's how they want to win the game. They want to be able to use the fact that they are a big team.
And Austin Reeves creates a lot of contact for himself too and gets to the free throw line. Like they want to get in the paint is my point. And when the margin
creates is a really good word because he will invent contact as well. Like he's quite good at just like, oh, you're just standing there, let me jump right into you. He's quite good at that.
Yeah. But the thing with the Lakers in the Mavs game last night was the Mavs had a significant enough cushion that the Lakers couldn't rely upon that because the Mavs were happy to give up 2-point baskets without fouling. And so if you were to go down the lane, they would trade baskets with you that way. And they forced the Lakers to deal with their perimeter shooting.
Yep.
The whole point of this, though, was to say that if you get into a game with this Mavs team without Luka and Kyrie and it's competitive down the stretch and it's tight, don't be surprised if the other team's shot makers prevail because they're starting caliber NBA first option scorers. If you get into a game with Portland and it's a tie game with a minute left, don't be surprised if the guy who walks off the court having decided the game is Anthony Simons.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so I think that the Mavs really need to win these games kind of need to be decided before the final 2 minutes. But if they can put some cushion between them and their opponent in 2 of the next 4 games and Kyrie's back, then I feel a lot better about where the Mavs are going to be when Luka returns.
Oh, I agree. And I think that, I think these games are important. And I also think that, it's normal for fans to doom when when you go on a losing streak. If you think a 5-game losing streak is bad, just go to like those teams that have 10, 12-game losing streaks. You got people trying to jump off of boats. And
especially if you think a 5-game losing streak without your 2 best players. Actually, there was a significant part of that where it's not just your 2 best players. It's like you mentioned, PJ Washington missed a game. Naji Marshall missed 4 games. Like you were Daniel Gafford went down with a high ankle sprain in one of them. I mean, like you're missing a lot of guys.
Yeah. No, and that's just if you have games where like 4 or 5 of your starters aren't playing, you're not going to win a lot of them.
No.
And I think that there's a measure. The Mavs are not as bad without Luka and Kyrie, or even without one of the two, as they were during that 5-game stretch. There were some artificial factors with that brought down. So I think you can expect a higher winning percentage than the 0% that they had during that 5-game.
You're not going to go 1-6.
Yeah, I would be surprised. But I also think that this is a title contending team. The biggest thing that all of this stuff when we're focusing on the now, it's important because you don't want to dig yourself out too big of a hole. You don't want a situation where they're having to claw into the 10th spot that would be less than ideal, obviously. But the biggest issue the Mavs have is that they've had like staggered injuries to the extent where the core lineup that they really need to be good has not had a lot of chance to play together yet. They haven't had that many minutes. You want a situation where if you let's say everyone's healthy by the time when you're in the ninth seed and you get a good run of games, that's not the worst case scenario. Put it that way. Like you can feel relatively comfortable because what we want is you want to basically have a chance where Luka, Kyrie, Klay, PJ, and Lively are able to get 15 consecutive games, 20 consecutive games together, ramping up into the postseason. That's the real benchmark. If everyone is like, if we go into the postseason and everyone's just coming back from injuries, and that five-man lineup hasn't played together more than like 3 minutes, or like 30 minutes all season, then that's where you can be like, okay, like the postseason could be rough because they just do not have a lot of chemistry together, and we've seen that situation. Phoenix had that problem 2 years ago where they traded for KD, and then I remember he twisted his ankle, and everyone else had been like sort of staggered hurt. You don't want to go in the postseason without having a lineup that's built chemistry. That's what I would be focusing on right now. And
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think with the Lakers, I'm sorry, with the Mavericks, is if you look at the West too, like the first seed's gone. OKC is going to be the first seed in the West. They have a huge lead in that department, and two, they prioritize regular season games in a way that maybe only one other team in the NBA does, and that's Cleveland. Outside of that team, I'm looking at the Rockets, the Grizzlies, the Nuggets, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Timberwolves, and the Spurs. The Mavs fully healthy compared to those teams, I think, are so much more better than those teams that I fully expect that grouping of teams, because basically what's going to happen is the Rockets, Grizzlies, Nuggets, Lakers, Clippers, I think, are going to be a group of teams that sort of stay paired together, all within 3-4 games of each other. If Kyrie comes back and you go 400 or 500 during that stretch before Luka returns, and I'm the Mavs organization, I'm looking at the Mavs organization, asking the training staff, what % do you tell me Luka's calf is? If you tell me 90%, I say keep him out until it's 100. He's not returning until it's 110. Because I think that the Mavericks are so much better than those teams that they will start winning they'll start 9-1 type out of 10 game type streaks when they get fully healthy.
Fuck this! What are you guys doing? Give him a bionic calf. What is this bullshit? Yeah.
I just think that the Mavs will be able to close space on all of those teams. Also, the worst thing in the world would not be the Mavs being like getting themselves into a 4-5 position and playing the Rockets or the Grizzlies in round one.
Yeah, I mean the Rockets, the Grizzlies. I would caution teams. I don't think the Grizzlies are as good as the Mavs, but the Grizzlies are having a similar situation all season as the Mavs have had, where they've just suffered an inundation of injuries, and I think that's artificially depressed their record, and it's pretty good anyways. Like they're deep in the way, they're 12 deep, but they've missed Ja, Bane, the Ja, Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah, but my problem with the Grizzly versus the Mavericks is I think that you could put Scottie Pippen Jr. on Ja Morant's shoulders and then have them eat Desmond Bane, and them still all three together not be big enough to guard Luka on the perimeter. And then you still have to deal with Kyrie on the other side. I just think that you've got, and I also think PJ Washington forces Jaren Jackson Jr. to sort of wander away from the paint. You can still have Zach Edey down there. I'm not as worried about. I actually think Zach Edey would find himself in foul trouble against the Mavericks pretty early on. I'm not saying Memphis isn't a good team. I kind of agree with something you said to me offline the other day, which is that the West is a much deeper conference than the East. But at the top, like I think you've got the Mavericks and the Thunder. And outside of that, I think there's a pretty big gulf in terms of elite teams.
Yeah, I mean the problem, parity is great, but it usually means there's some mediocrity happening. That's just because if there's just a set amount of good players, and if they're spread out pretty evenly, then you don't have a lot of like really elite teams, and that's kind of the situation the West has had. The Spurs, like I'm a fan of the Spurs. That team is hovering at 500 in the West, and it is an adventure every night with how well they play quarter to quarter. And that team, in a typical year, which not as much parity, would not have as higher a record as it has this year. It's just that there's the competition they're facing isn't as top heavy as it typically is, and I think that that is to the Mavs' advantage, to be really clear. What I meant more is I think they can beat the Grizzlies. I have no real doubts about that. Is I prefer to avoid them in the first round. Like I would prefer to face like a team where they can buzzsaw through and not come out because the one thing the Grizzlies will do is that they are a physical team that like you'll have some bumps and bruises coming out of that even if you do that. So I would prefer a different first round matchup. But the one that is funny to me that I think that it seems to me maybe like fate is heading at is I do wonder if we had a situation where the Mavs end up in the first round against the Thunder. And in that case, if they do beat the Thunder, they suddenly, even though they're going to be on the road, they're going to suddenly assume the easiest path to the finals because they will have beaten their number one team and they'll have taken over that lane in the
So you
playoff
think
bracket.
that they would end up being the worst play-in team?
I mean, most likely not. I just don't. But this is more just like something that I would find amusing if it happened than most likely, the most realistic scenario. But if that is the case, like the other, if they get in the 4-5 slot, they'll play the Thunder in the second round. Basically, because that's just how it would work out. But I think that the more likely outcome is probably I think they end up in 4-5. Assuming that that players are not out the entire year. Because I think the bigger one of the issues we haven't talked about is the longer players stay out, the more it becomes exhausting for the role players, and it's easier to maintain hope as a team when you have a clear sense of when your best player is coming back. But if it starts becoming like, oh, we don't know if Luka's going to come back, like the morale will decrease across the team.
Well, I mean, I mean, then the conversation just changes completely. Like,
well, yeah,
if we don't know if Luka's coming back, then there's nothing to talk about with the team.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So I fully expect not only will Luka come back, I don't expect there to be enough urgency to bring him back prematurely. I think you're going to see them rest that calf until it's fully healed. And I think that what you're going to see, because the other thing too is once you get past the threshold of OKC, and now you're talking about Houston, Memphis, Denver, and the Lakers, like I agree with you. Dallas isn't about to go on some 10-game winning streak, right? Like that's not about to happen right now. But I do think even if they won 2 of their next 4, they beat Portland, they beat New Orleans, and then they drop both to Denver. And then Kyrie returns. I think it would be safe to say that Dallas earlier in the season during the 7-game stretch without Luka were 5-2.
Yes.
All right. Let's say they're 6-3 over that stretch. They're winning at a 6-3 clip over that stretch, and then Luka returns. All right. So then they go 8-5 over the full stretch.
Yep.
All right. The thing is Memphis and Houston and LA are still losing games during that time period too.
100%.
I think they will win them at a higher clip than the Mavericks are, but not much. And so I think that the Mavericks are going to still be paired right next to them. So if you told me Luka comes back fully healthy let's say at the beginning of February, Kyrie comes back in 4 games. And you said you're not going to suffer any more season-altering injuries. Like, you're going to have the normal nicks and bruises. Guy's going to get hit in the ribs, miss a game. Guy's going to roll an ankle, miss 2 games, that kind of thing. But you're not going to have any more significant injuries. The bubonic plague is fully out of the locker room. All of that. The most likely seed, in my opinion, for Dallas going into the playoffs would be the 2 seed.
Yeah, yes, I think I would something that depends on like a bunch of factors that are out of our control at this point. There could be like if there seems to be a bunch of teams in the West that are also like gunning for like super win now moves that could change the equation.
I'll grant you that.
Yeah, and so like I think that there's just a lot of variables that we just don't know the answer to right now. But the way I look at it, I think this is sort of a good point to end on. The way I look at it is this. This is a Tyler or bust season, not in the sense that if they get to the finals, it's a bad season, but they've already been there. Like that's not something to celebrate. At that
Their
point.
goal is to win a championship.
Their goal is to win the title. So what everything should be geared towards that. And so rushing Luka back doesn't make sense, especially since he's shown a proclivity this season for knick-knack injuries, and so. You want to really err on the side of caution, caution there. And, because the last thing that, if he's only at 90% by the playoffs, it's going to be really hard to win. Like, you need a pretty much full strength Luka. You need a pretty much full strength Kyrie. You need to be, you need to have a healthy team, for the playoffs to be able to win all 4 rounds. And so, like, that should be the goal, assuming that the team doesn't fully nosedive and that like that, like, but so the goal that I want here is to get everyone back healthy with enough time for the starting 5 that's been the best starting 5 in the league, like by net rating, to have a run of games together, to be able to build chemistry and be really strong like we did last year when we got after we traded for Gafford, like after we did that, like we gave them enough games where they were able to play together, get chemistry, be it playing at their best level going into the playoffs. That's what I'm hoping for.
Like, so to kind of and this is kind of an interesting thought experiment for us to comment on and close out this episode would be, would you agree with me that Chet Holmgren is probably the second best player on OKC?
Yes, I would say that.
I think so, and we can discuss on a different day whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But he's currently out. They play Cleveland tonight in a game I'm actually looking very much forward to watching.
Yes, it's gonna be a really fun game and be telling about both teams. It'll be
yes, 100%. If in the first quarter of that game, Shea came up lame with a severe calf injury, on par with what happened to Luka on Christmas Day, and they gave a prognosis on par with what they gave for Luka. Without Chet and without Shea, where do you mark OKC's abilities to compete with teams in the West?
I think that they become a version of what we've seen with Orlando. So I think at that point you still have the core of their really, really good defense that's available, but that's there, and they're going to be like they will be able to survive. Like, it's not going to be an elite team, but they're going to be able to survive by basically keeping games in the 90s and doing what Orlando's been doing. But the Achilles heel of the Thunder has been the same for the last 2 years. They have 2 dudes in the entire roster right now that can create for others. That can create shots.
So the way I was going to put it was there's one very big difference between Orlando and OKC in this situation. Orlando has not been without a ball handler.
No, they have not.
And OKC would now be without a good ball handler who can create for others.
Yeah, I think that would be you'd be telling that would be very telling. And I could also see them at that point just being like, "Hey, Markelle Fultz, what are you doing, buddy?" And going out and grabbing someone. But the they are. I mentioned this at the top. Like their chessboard, if we're going to use that analogy, is very heavy on like they got a bunch of really like they're really good at using bishops, and they for some reason have accumulated like 6 of them. So as long as so they have basically like they have of the knights and the rooks, they got like one a piece of each. If you take one of those away, suddenly like it's like they're missing a big part of their offense. They're missing something that's really critical. And the thing that I've been tracking all year, and that's sort of been I think it's starting to get discussed a little bit, is the one we have yet to see Jalen Williams, who's the other creator I was talking about when I said they had 2 creators. Play. He had a lot of hype going into the season. He hasn't played that well. He hasn't been like atrocious, but in the big games, against Boston when they won, he struggles. You can take you teams have shown an ability to take him out of games, and I think that it would be I think he'd have a lot of difficulty without Shea carrying an offense. I think that'd be a tall ask. That's something that because I think teams would just on him and basically be like, hey, Case and Wallace, go beat us. I think that and I just they it's possible. Like Case and Wallace is a good player. They have, but that's just a lot to ask for someone who's never been in the NBA at least been tasked with fully running an offense. He's his job coming in and playing defense.
That to me is the major difference between that and versatility are the 2 major differences between OKC and Dallas. I think that, and actually I'll throw in a third major difference that I think I might value more than a lot of OKC fans. I think that Shea with the ball in his hands as a primary scorer is as good as anyone in the league. I even would go as far as to say probably on a night in, night out basis, he'll do it more efficiently than Luka.
Right now, he's I mean, its efficiency right now is
out of his mind.
Yeah, out of his mind.
The thing I would say though about comparing Luka and Shea as scorers is that Luka's top end ability as a scorer is much higher than Shea's. When Luka is efficient in scoring from all levels of the floor, Luka just shits out a 40-point game, no problem. 40-point games are more sparse for Shea. But the difference between them two isn't scoring to me. The difference between them two is Luka's playmaking ability. I think Kyrie Irving as a dynamic scorer is much more dangerous than Jalen Williams.
Yes.
And I don't even think that's particularly close. I think when you take those 2 guys away from Dallas and you look at what Dallas is able to put on the floor, I agree with you. I think that what OKC would be able to put on the floor without Shea and without Chet Holmgren or without Shea and without Jalen Williams, whichever 2 you want to remove, it doesn't even matter to me. What OKC would be able to put on the floor would be offensively borderline inept. I don't think they would be able to create much of anything for anyone. All of those guys who are knocking down open perimeter shots, those shots would suddenly not be open.
I think
their defense would be better than Dallas's. I'm not arguing. I agree with you about that.
I would. The situation where they would particularly struggle in, and like you saw this in the Boston game, even with basically a full complement without Chet, when they are forced to play a half court game, they struggle because they are basically, especially against good defenses that prioritize taking away Jalen Williams or reducing his efficiency. What it ends up a lot of times being is Shea having to score like all the points, and he can do that, but there's anyone who follows basketball knows that's one guy's not going to be able to compete with it by himself. If you just reduce him to a scorer, that limits that. When they are able to make it into a transition game, when they're able to that's why they prioritize generating so many steals. That's the real reason why. Both it's good defense, but they need those easy buckets to get to their high point totals, and it also speeds up the game. That's why one of the things that teams I think are going to focus on more and more against them is the danger of shooting a lot of threes, like like just loading up and taking like 2/3 of your shots or like whatever Boston tries to do on them is that those generates like threes lead to long rebounds, which are easier to make the game into more of a sprinting contest. What you want to do against OKC is slow it down and turn this into a 90s game where like
which is another reason why they're a bad matchup for the Lakers.
Bad matchup for the Lakers. It's also like Luka with his physicality is a guard who's very, who's adept at that. Like he's built for a half court game in a way that Shea isn't. For example, now Shea does score in the half court to be really clear, but he like his style like
none of OKC's scoring problems in the half court or full court have anything to do with Shea other than his ability to create looks for others.
Well, and even that's as I'm not. I don't want to even say it's his passing ability. It's the problem. If you watch OKC, there's just a lot of stationary shooters, and so it's not that hard to scheme against them in a lot of cases because if you say we're going to force Shea to beat us and you keep your help defenders locked onto their men, like he doesn't have a lot of passing lanes because they're not moving around a lot like that. That was the Mavs thing. The Mavs in the playoffs were like, we're just going to keep our men on the shooters, and you're gonna have to beat your man consistently every time. And we'll bring up the center. That will be it. But that's the only player we're gonna have help a lot of times.
Well, and to be clear, I'm not even referring to Shea's ability as a passer. I'm referring to where he's trying to get to on the floor.
Oh yeah.
You're not going to compromise the defense attacking the mid range.
No.
Like Luka's folding defenses because he's attacking the rim.
Yes.
And there's a lob threat behind them. So it's forcing more guys to gather around the rim, and then that's creating the open look.
Oftentimes, he's slowly pushing a dude into another dude. That's kind of what. Like he collapses the defense just by default because he pushes his defender into another defender. That because he's so big.
But Shea isn't collapsing a defense, getting to the elbow to put up a jump shot. He's going to make it. It's a great shot. He's going to score it consistently. And I do agree with you too. Like there's just a lot of stationary shooters around the perimeter that are getting open looks off of help defenders. But I think that's sort of a good place to end this. Really just wanted to jump on and do a reaction pod to last night's Lakers-Mavs game because I think there's been a lot of bedwetting in Mavs land about the performance of a team that's missing not just their two best players, but like two guys that are, arguably the best offensive backcourt in NBA history that a franchise has been built around, a whole team constructed, around those guys' skills and what they're able to bring to the game. And suddenly, the Mavs have a drop off when they're missing both of those guys. Should not come as a surprise to anyone. But last night against the Lakers, we just wanted to remind people, this is a perfect example of why Dallas is a team that no one wants to draw in the postseason.
Yep.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends and family. We appreciate everyone helping spread our content around, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, and don't forget to comment too.